Hello and welcome to my leisure project, which is on the topic of sewing. My name is Siddharth Subramanian. So the history of sewing basically is that the earliest traces of needles went back to 40,000 BC, and but these were the very earliest models of needles. And back then the sewing methods were very archaic, like just kind of tying pieces of fur and cloth together so you could survive in the cold. But as history went on, there were more and more small advancements, and so eventually we got leather, we got needles that had actual holes in it so we could weave string easier. But in 1810, an inventor from Germany managed to make a machine that works similar to a modern day sewing machine, and it specialized in making hats. And this was when we could really make a large amount of commercialization off of sewing, because we could make such a large amount at such a swift pace. So it became a more commercialized or more practical or more than just a leisure hobby. I think this has been a female activity, or I think this quote does a really good job of explaining why it's been primarily a female activity. This quote basically says that after the Second World War, feminism kind of, or feminine or woman appearance went back to more archaic and earlier ideals, such as having like feminine qualities, and people felt that sewing was an activity that really demonstrated those feminine qualities, such as service to others, beauty, and they believed that sewing is one of the ways that they could embrace this feminine quality. So I think that this was why it was primarily females involved in this leisure activity in its early ages. Yeah, so I think according to historical influences, I think definitely that this hobby tends to favor females. And in modern day, there is a slightly negative bias towards male in the fashion industry, thinking of them to have more extreme personalities. But I think that also in school, pe- women tend to take classes like cooking or quilting or fashion, while men take classes like woodworks or metalworks or a bit more strenuous arts. So I think people are set up in such a way to view sewing as a more feminine hobby. So currently, I do think there's a somewhat bias. There's somewhat of a bias towards men in sewing, and that's because I think that I read an article for this project where a person who's a basically professional sewer is a male and talks about how there is an inadequacy for him, or there is a bias for him as being a male in this industry, and he feels that's something he struggles with a lot. Like one time he tried to get into a sewing event, but he couldn't because he would have been the only male, and the organizers thought everyone would have been uncomfortable with only one male in a group of 20 or 30 females. So, my main theory after reading into this is basically that in the ancient times, we had certain hobbies that were for males and certain hobbies that were for females. And because of this over time, we've seen it again in literature and media of these ancient biases coming back up where certain hobbies are dominated by certain genders. So because of this like trend in history, we grow up having these small biases towards certain genders. I think, like I said earlier, in this class we had that exercise where we had to examine our own biases over gender, and one of those biases were gender versus career. I think this really ties into that because sometimes we have developed these subconscious biases based on gender, and I do believe it's because in the past we've grown up in a society where in the past many cultures have differentiated male and female hobbies, and those values just become ingrained without us knowing over the course of our life. So my activity I did for my leisure project, or in this case, was I asked around my family and I took several shirts, like different shirts, and these were all shirts that either had a rip, or most of them just didn't have a button in them or lost a few buttons, and I tried to mend that button back onto the shirt. I don't have pictures of everything, but I do have many pictures of this one flannel shirt, which I did, and the reason I took them up this shirt particularly was because the time of day I did this leisure activity for this shirt was during a time with a lot of natural light, so pictures came out really well for this flannel. The reason I never did this before is because it seemed very mundane and boring to me, I felt kind of like, why do this when I could be doing something else, like playing a sport, playing a video game. But I think that I think that it challenged me a lot, and I also enjoyed it a lot. But more on enjoying it later. It challenged me because it taught me a good amount of humility. Because when you're sewing, there's that tiny hole on the end of the needle, and I was not able to get the string in that needle the first time, so it took me multiple attempts, despite me thinking I'd be able to do it easily on my first time. So it was kind of like a humility moment, like step down. It also required like me to really focus on what I was doing, because if I'm playing a video game or playing a sport that I've done a lot, I don't need to put my 100% attention to it because I've done it so much to where I can kind of focus on my own thing. But it's required me to really sit down and put all of my focus on this one task. And as for insights, I think I have a lot more respect for people who take this craft seriously because of the amount of dexterity and deftness it requires for someone to really be good at this art. And I think that male activities aren't as delicate and might be a bit more wild, such as like playing like a contact sport. And I do think I want to do this skill again because I kind of realized over the course of this project that this leisure activity is also something I could use for the rest of my life like a tool. Like there might be a time later in my life where someone rips clothes or my kids rip their or lose a button, and I could use this skill to help them. And also you use very delicate motions in this skill, so I believe that if I were to keep practicing this, I wouldn't develop as many hand problems as many elderly do because I'd be using such fine delicate motions to do sewing. Well, that's it so far. That's it. These are my references. I really liked doing this project. It was a lot of fun. Thank you for listening.